Hi everyone, it's Sandra here, and this video is all about how I do a basic worm bin feeding. This is Gus, a worm bin that lives in my kitchen and contains mostly red wigglers, probably some Indian blue worms, and maybe some of my native Vancouver Island worms. I see worms grazing on the top here as I open up the bin. Always a good sign that they're out looking for food. And that's actually the very first thing that I do when I go into a worm bin to do a feeding. And that is just to observe the worms. Are they grazing throughout the material? What does the material look like? Is it dry on the top, or is there still some moisture? And what about the edges? Are the edges drying out too much? Is material not getting circulated around? And so the very first thing I do is just start observing instead of going straight to the feeding. And as I fluff, I find things, avocado pits. If they won't open easily, I just leave them for another time. And then I move on to fluff the entire bin. And that gives me a sense of what's going on before I decide how and where to feed. Certainly there have been times that I've gone into a worm bin and just gone straight to a feeding. Maybe I'm in a hurry. Maybe I've been in the bin within the last week or so and I know it's okay. But most times I like to do a total bin fluff before I get around to doing the feeding. You'll hear me and other worm farmers talk about compressed castings. And as the castings start to build up, that's certainly a possibility. Sorry about the camera shake there. But compressed castings are more an indication for us on how the material is finishing and the moisture level. They don't really bother the worms. They're not going to create an anaerobic environment just because the castings are starting to compress on the bottom of the bin. It's a sign your bin is healthy and that the castings are starting to accumulate, which is exactly what you want. Fluffing the bin also distributes the microbes into all the corners. So it's sort of like a snakes and ladders things for the worms, like you're going to give them material that was maybe dry at the edge and not getting composted, but that's also distributing the microbes everywhere. That was a whole peanut that the worms have not broken through the shell yet, and I'm not going to open it for them. So yeah, you're distributing the worms, you're distributing the moisture, and you're distributing the microbes. So all in all, just making the bin as efficient as possible. After my observation and fluffing, I'm going to feed down the middle of this bin. The material's not that deep yet, so I'm going to go all the way to the bottom here, and then I'm going to bring in a layer of carbon. Now, I'm going to use a dry carbon, and certainly you would decide whether or not you're going to use a carbon that's dry or wet, depending on the moisture of your bin. For me, I have an abundant supply of leaves. In fact, I'm going to use some shredded maple leaves. There's a couple bamboo leaves in here that you can probably see. Maple leaves are excellent. They compost quickly because of the low lignin content. They have a great 30-to-1 carbon-nitrogen ratio. I'm just adding some mushy frozen then thawed apples on top. And then I'm going to top it up with some more carbon. And so you'll see that I've got the wet food in the middle, basically making a carbon sandwich out of the apple goo in the middle. And then I just fold the surrounding material over top. This is going to just sit for a while and the moisture will equalize between the food and those leaves. Now, leaves have microbes on them. So as soon as they get a touch of that moisture from the surrounding area, the worms will be all over those leaves. It's what worms do. They live in the leaf litter and they will go to town eating all those leaves as well as that apple. I also want to point out that I spread the food thinly so that I wouldn't get any compost action and the worms could get into it right away before the food went anaerobic. Now I'm just going to top with a brown paper bag that's just lightly moist from being on top of the castings and a loose bubble wrap. Thanks everyone for checking in on this basic worm bin feeding. Gus looks to be in fine shape. Bye for now.